Okay, I've started the recording, so I don't want to wait too much longer for anyone else to join us. That's what we can begin. So as I said to Chris earlier, we're going to start going through a 2023 exam paper this evening. And I'm just going to start from question 1 and work our way through it. And then whatever we don't finish this evening, we'll carry on with next week in the NSS session, so that between this evening and next week, I'll cover as many possible questions in that 2023 exam paper as possible to give us a nice, good revision grounding. And as I also said to Chris, don't forget, go and have a look at your YouTube channel. You've got the link to the YouTube channel. What do they call it? The playlist for FINM7321. It's in your more resources and somewhere near the beginning of your announcements. And if you go and you click on that, you'll find in YouTube all of the previous collabs, as well as there are at least 3 previous exam papers that are fully recorded in working through them. And each exam paper is usually split into probably 2 recordings at least. So go and have a look, sometimes even 3 recordings. So go and have a look at that and use that for your revision. It will help you tremendously. Just what Chris has said he's doing as well. He's working through each learning unit from the beginning, going through each learning unit from scratch, working through the examples, and then every single question in the textbook. And when you finish that, then you go back and start practicing with past papers. And then you know that you will be prepared. So guys, also remember your theory questions. Please don't forget, don't only concentrate on the calculations. These last couple of years, I've noticed they are paying just as much attention to our theory questions as they are to the learning object, to the calculations. So go and use all of your learning objectives. Make sure that you can answer questions on all of the theory learning objectives. So that's those learning objectives where they say define, discuss, explain, compare. You must be able to do those as well. It's quite likely that 30, 40, 50% of the exam paper could be theory questions, and you must be prepared for that. They're definitely moving in that direction and getting out of the habit of only asking students calculations, because half of your learning objectives are theory learning objectives, and they are supposed to test us on that as well. So you must be prepared for that. I'll just make sure I have warned you. Okay. Right. Okay. So Mark and Chris, I'm going to share my screen so that I can, and then I can I'm going to share my screen so that I can then go over to the PDF and we can start working through those questions. So just give me a minute while I switch the sharing on. Okay. There you go. You should be able to see my screen now. If you want to ask any questions, guys, remember these sessions are informal. You can just open up your microphone and ask me a question at any time, and I'll answer you. Otherwise, you can type your question in the chat box, and I'll pop back every now and again and just check to see what questions you've got in the chat box. Okay. All right, so let's go over to the question paper. So this is our first question. And this is just for 5 marks. So I think whoever wrote this question paper was just giving the students a little warm up right at the beginning of the paper. But with saying that also, guys, remember that when you've got a 180 mark 3-hour paper that you will be doing, sit down, close book. It's a long paper with a lot of questions. So remember, you do not have to start at question 1, then do question 2, then question 3, and work your way through the paper like that. You are absolutely free to do whichever question you want to first. So if you really like question 5 and you know that you can get that done quickly and you know the answer, then do question 5 first, and then you can jump around as much as you like, as long as you head every question correctly and make sure that you've numbered them correctly, so that I can, and then I'll easily see which question you've answered, and it makes no difference to me in what order you do the questions. And you should do the questions in the order of the first question, the question that you know the best, you'll do that first and then work your way through the questions, so that your least familiar questions you'll leave right at the end for the last. You've already put all your marks on the table for those questions that you do know well, and then that last question that you might need a bit of time or you're struggling to remember, leave that right for the end. And that is honestly a really good way to make sure that you pass the paper as well. What you don't want to do is leave a question right at the end that you then can't finish, and you discover that that's a question that you knew really well and you could have got really good marks for it if you had the time to finish. Okay, I always remind students of that, and honestly, it's a key to making sure you get a good mark in the exam. Okay, so this first question is a Learning Unit 2 time value of money question. Yorker Limited, company making cricket balls, they are expanding and they have projected the following cash flows with this new investment that they are going to make. So in year one, and take note that this amount is in brackets, which means that that is a cash flow out. So that basically represents the investment that the company is going to make when they have to pay cash out at the beginning of the project. And then in years 2, 3, and 4, we've got positive cash flows, which are the cash flows coming in, which are the cash flows that are then being generated by our project. The opportunity cost is 15% per annum. So take note, they can use the terminology opportunity cost. They can say the cost of capital. They can say the required rate of return of the company. All of those mean the same thing. And what they are indicating here is the percentage that we must use when we work out the present or future value of whatever stream of cash flows that they've given us. So the required is to calculate, and please take a highlighter with you. Couple of highlighters, because sometimes you might need to use 2 colors for one question. They want the future value of the cash flows, and they have specified that you must use the financial tables, assuming that the cash flows will occur at the end of each year. Okay, so all of that information is important. Here are our cash flows. This is the opportunity cost, or our cost of capital that we'll use to discount the cash flows. They want us to calculate the future value. We must use the financial tables, which means we must write down the factor from the financial tables, and the cash flows occur at the end of each year, not at the beginning. Remember also, there's a difference between the cash flows and the time, whether they take place at the beginning or the end of the period. Okay. So just make sure you guys have been practicing with your formula sheets. I don't know, I told you guys to print one out. Make sure that you are using it, and when you are practice these questions, that you've got your formula sheet next to you and you are using that to practice these questions. Financial tables are attached to the formula sheet so that, again, you get used to, you're familiar with them and you're comfortable using them, and it's not like a scramble in the middle of the exam to try and find everything on your formula sheet. So remember future value. So that means, let's say the beginning of year one, right at the beginning of year one would be day one, and at the end of year one would be day 365. So when we move in from the present to the future, we start on day one and we move our way through the year till the end of the year on day 365. Then we go to day one of the next year and we move through to the end of that year, beginning of the following year through to the end of that, and so on, so that our future value, the actual final future value that we are trying to calculate, sits here at day 365 at the end of year 4. So our present value is right here at the beginning. Day 1 of year 1 is where our present value would be, and day 365 of day 4 is where our future value would be. Because they say the cash flows occur at the end of the year, our cash flow will only occur on day 365. Okay. So when we are calculating a future value, that means we are only going to count the future of the cash flow from day 1 of year 2. This cash flow, it didn't exist at all during year 1. It only came into existence on day 365 of year 1. So future value of this is going to be 1, 2, 3. Okay, 3 periods. The future value of the cash flow that takes place at the end of year 2 is only going to be calculated 1, 2 periods. This cash flow that takes place at the end of year 3, to calculate its future value, we will only take it from 1 year, beginning to the end of year 4. Okay. And this cash flow that takes place at the end of year 4, it takes place at the exact date of the future value. So we will multiply that by itself. If there's no time value of money to change it, this future value of 14,150 will be 14,150. So let's just go and have a look at our table for this future value. Gosh, my future value table is so tiny, I can hardly read it. Okay, so we said that this cash flow that took place at the end of year 1 is going to grow only 3 times to get to the future. It will grow for the full year 2, the full year 3, until the end of year 4, so 3 times. So on your future value tables, you are going to look for the table that says future value of 1 rand. So in other words, the future value of a lump sum table. You are going to look for the column for 15%. And then for this cash flow that takes place at the end of year 1, you are going to look for period 3. And that's where this 1521 comes from. Okay, so on your tables, 1521 occurs on the future value of a lump sum table, 15% column, and 3 periods. This one will be 15% column and 2 periods. This one will be the 15% column and 1 period, because it only grew through 1 year. And then this last one, the future value factor for the cash flow that takes place at the end of year 4 is 1. So in other words, we are just going to multiply it by 1. It hasn't changed in value at all. Please don't forget to leave this amount negative. So this will be the negative cash flow out, and these 3 here, and we'll add those all together to get the future value. This over here, you can see, sorry, that is obviously just a typo on the memo. That is a future value. It is correct everywhere else. Future value factor, and the total future value is 23,177,150. Okay. With these questions here, please just read carefully. Have they asked for the future value, or have they asked for the present value? Did they say the cash flow took place at the beginning of the year, or did they say the cash flow took place at the end of the year? So that you take in those factors into account when you are doing your calculation. Okay. So I thought I heard somebody posting a question or somebody else joining, but obviously it wasn't. Okay, guys, you guys good with that question? Anything that you're not sure about there? Can you round off year 2 to 1323? Let's just go and have a look. No. Let me just have a look here on the, if the table, the exact factor on the table says 1322, so you must use it like that. Remember, they asked us to use the table, not the financial calculator, and our factors in our table have got 3 decimals, so we must keep those 3 decimals. Definitely don't round that off. Otherwise, you would lose these half marks. If you change the factor on the table, you'd lose those half marks there. Okay, so then let's have a look at our next question. I just want to check what learning unit the next one is from. Learning unit 6. This was one of our capital budgeting questions. And this one, they have given 45 marks from it, because remember, learning unit 6 and learning unit 7, we have not been tested on in either of the 2 tasks. And so they will give us fairly long questions for learning unit 6 and learning unit 7. So in this question, they said the company is considering investing in a new cricket academy in Joburg, where it will be used for whatever. Very important, you're going to, this is why you're taking a highlighter with you, because you want to make sure that you make it easy to find information in the question when you're going back to do your calculation. The cricket nets will need to be repaired at the end of the 2nd year at an expected cost of 200,000, and again at the end of the 4th year, where the cost will then have increased by a further 50%. Okay, so they increased by 50%, which means at the end of the 2nd year, the repair costs are going to be 200 Rand. At the end of the 4th year, this 200,000 will have increased by 50%. And that cost will then occur at the end of the 4th year. Then in addition to that, in year 6, the pitch on the main field and grass will need to be upgraded at an estimated cost of 1250. And at the end of the 7th year, the facilities are expected to be sold to an educational group who are intending to develop whatever, and the selling price is expected to be 6.5 million. So over here, this is a cost. This will be a cash flow out. In year 4, this is a cost. That will be a cash flow out. In year 6, it is an upgrade, which is a cost. That 1250 will be cash flow out. At the end of the 7th year, we are going to sell the, whatever it is, what we build in here. The facilities will be sold, which means that 6.5 million will be a cash flow in. Okay. All of the above cash flows have not been taken into account in the projections below, which means they've given us a table of cash flows over here, but you need to amend these cash flows by making these adjustments as well. So this is where it comes into effect that you guys must read your questions carefully to make sure that you incorporate. It would be so easy for you it would be too easy as 3rd years if they just gave you a table and said, these are the cash flows, go ahead. They've given us this extra information to make sure, are we reading correctly? Can we do some simple calculations? Can we adjust our cash flow table to include these additional cash flows so that, again, we are paying attention to detail and we can make these simple adjustments in the question. Okay. They also said initial investment at the beginning. There were no brackets around this 8750, but we know that the initial investment means that that will be a cash out. Initial investment is always, whoopsie, I can't draw a bracket. Initial investment will always be a cash out. So don't forget that that is cash outflow, and all of the rest of these are inflows. We have to do these additional outflows that they've mentioned here at year 2, year 4, and year 6. And at the end of year 7, we've got an additional cash inflow of that 6.5 million. We have got a cost of capital of 11% and a targeted payback period of 4.5%. Required, calculate the payback period for the Joburg Academy. And again, there's an and advise as to whether we should go ahead with the project or not. And all of that is for 13 marks. Okay. So the first thing that you're going to do is you are going to draw up your table for the cash flows with those additional adjustments in them. Initial cash flow out has got brackets. Year 1 is as they gave it to us. At the end of year 2, we've got that additional 200,000 cash flow out. We must add that in so that the year 2's cash flows is not 1.9 million in, but 1.7 million in. And here is at the end of year 4, they said that cost of 200,000 increased by 50%. So 50% of 200,000 is 100,000. So at the end of year 4, our cost is 300,000. So again, it's a cash flow in of 3.2 million minus 300,000. So it's a net cash flow in of 2.9. And in year 5, the given cash flow of 3.5. So remember when I was explaining calculating payback periods, we only need to calculate the cumulative cash flow until we reach that point where we have got the last negative cumulative cash flow turns into a positive cash flow. And you don't need to then do year 6 and year 7 as well, because our payback period will occur somewhere exactly between year 4 and year 5. Because at the end of year 4, our cumulative cash flow is still negative, whereas at the end of year 5, we have now turned positive. So we know the payback, the point of payback occurs between year 4 and year 5. So it'll be 4 point something years. And also remember, I told you to take your highlighter, highlight the year number of the last negative amount, and then you are going to highlight the negative amount and you are going to calculate that over the next positive cash flow in. Okay, so we can draw a diagonal line like that. What's going on here? Okay, so we've highlighted 4. So my payback period is going to be 4 years plus, we've highlighted the last negative 250 plus 250 over, and we've highlighted the next cash flow in over 3.5 million. So 250,000 over 3.5 million is 0.07. So our payback period is then 4 years plus 0.07 of the 5th year. So it's 4.07 years. They told us that our target payback is 4.5 years. So that means we will accept any projects whose payback period is 4.5 years or less. So our payback is 4.07 years, which is less than 4.5 years. So we will say, yes, accept the project. half a mark for saying accept the project, and then the other half a mark for the reason, because the payback period is below our target payback of 4.5 years. So those are our 13 marks for getting the table, the individual cash flows correct, for getting the cumulative cash flows correct. And remember, these cumulative cash flows, what we do there is we take the first cash flow, which is cash flow out, then we add the next cash flow in, so 8750 minus 8750 plus 1.4, what is the cumulative total? Minus 7350 plus 1.7, what is the cumulative total? And we keep calculating the cumulative total until that first year when it turns from negative to positive. And even if you don't get this calculation correct, you can see just by getting your table correct, you've already got the majority of the marks for the question. Okay. And then there's 2 marks for the payback calculation and 1 mark for the conclusion. So 10 marks for the table and 3 marks for the calculation and the conclusion. Just double check. Okay. Then for 5 marks, and this is a theory question, advise the directors about the concerns you have about them making decisions based solely on the payback period method. So in your learning objectives, you've got a learning objective that says what are the advantages and the disadvantages of the payback period method. So obviously you will use the disadvantages as your concerns about the payback period method. So guys, remember also, they're not going to, the question on your exam paper isn't going to say what are the drawbacks of the payback period method. They will word it in a way that sounds like a real life situation, and then you have to understand that the advantages and disadvantages are what they are talking about. So concerns would be disadvantages, so that is what you would then discuss. So always in your own words, but obviously you have to memorize the disadvantages so that you can discuss them enough for 5 marks. 1 mark per fact or 1 mark per point that you've made. Don't take one fact and repeat it in different ways, because you will still only get 1 mark for that. So you must give me 5 different disadvantages or 5 different points about the disadvantages of the payback method. So I'm not going to read through all of this, just for time's sake. You guys have got that in your textbook and you understand how you need to answer that question. Okay. So then for question 2.3, for 27 marks, they have asked us to calculate the annualized net present values. So the ANPVs for both. Again, read carefully, use your highlighter, circle important words in the question for both Joburg and the Durban Academies. And don't forget the ands, because there's marks. And also, once you've calculated the ANPVs, advise the management as to which of the academies they should invest in based on the ANPV method. Okay. So if you remember the annualized net present value method, what it requires from us to do is to calculate the net present value of the cash flow. So here they've given us a second set of cash flows for the Durban Academy. We've already got here the cash flows for Johannesburg. Remembering, we've got to make these adjustments. So we will do one table for the Johannesburg cash flows. We will do all 7 years, including these adjustments. We will then calculate the net present value of those Joburg cash flows. We will then do a table for the Durban cash flows, taking into account additional information here at the end of the 3rd year. Nets will need to be repaired, so that's an extra cost. And at the end of the 5th year, we will sell it. So that will be a selling price, which will be a cash flow in, which will be, the amount will be double of year 1's cash flow. And again, these 2 cash flows mentioned here in year 3 and year 5 have not been taken into account yet. So they must be included. For Durban, we must use 9% for the cost of capital. And remember, for Joburg, we are using 11% for so our net present value, we'll use 11% for the Joburg cash flows, and for Durban, we will use 9% to calculate, excuse me, the net present values. So let's go and have a look at the net present value calculations first, and then we will have a look at how we convert the net present values into an annualized net present value. Just give me 1 sec. Okay, so if the question does not specify a method, you are free to use whichever method you want to for calculating your net present value. You can use the table which is similar to this table here, where you write down the cash flow and you look up the factor on the table, or either calculate the factor on your calculator and then calculate the cash flow. 100%, you can do that method, or you can use the financial calculator method, where you will write down every single one of the 7 years of cash flow. You will state which percentage you are using to calculate the present value, and then it is comp NPV. Okay. There is our net present value for Johannesburg. Take note, we made all of these adjustments in year 2, in year 4, in year 6, and at the end of year 7, the additional cash flow in where we sold that particular facility. And then we do the same for Durban. This was only 5 years, was it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years worth of cash flows. But again, you're writing down all of the cash flows, including those adjustments that they gave us. And at the end of year 5 as well, there was a cost adjustment, and then the cash flow in where we sold the facility that they said we sold it for double of the original cash flow. So just be careful with these. Don't rush. Make sure you've got each cash flow amount correct, because you can see there's lots of marks here just for getting the rand value of each year's cash flow correct. And then for our discount percentage, we're going to use 9% for Durban, and then comp NPV, and there is the net present value that we have calculated. To turn that into an annualized net present value, again, we can use the financial calculator method. So just looking for something in my textbook. Just give me 1 second here. I just want to find my reference, page 208. You can use the financial calculator version, which requires us to use N, in other words, how many years of cash flow did we have? So Joburg, there were 7 years, Durban, there were 5 years. I, or R, which is what is the percentage we're using for the present value calculation. So for Joburg, it's 11%, for Durban, it's 9%. Then the present value is going to be this net present value that we've calculated. So for Durban, 5098, 510, and for Joburg, 11,935,927, the net present value that we calculated, we use as the present value, and then we comp PMT. It's an annualized net present value. So what we are calculating here is what Rand value annuity would give us this particular net present value over 5 years at a 9% discount. So in other words, if we had equal annual cash flows, what would they be in order to give us that net present value? So Joburg, our annualized net present value would be 2.5 million. And for Durban, the annualized net present value is 1.3 million. Now remember, this is the annualized net present value, which means we have annualized the cash flows in. So because these are cash flows in, we are going to choose the one that has got the highest net present value or highest annualized net present value. So select Johannesburg Academy because it has got the highest annualized net present value. The other way, the other method you can use to calculate annualized net present value, you will find in example 7.8 in your textbooks. And in that case, you would have to look up the present value factor of an annuity on your table that you will have. Okay, let me just write this here. The present value of an annuity. Okay, so you must remember, make sure you're using the present value of an annuity table and using n equals 7 and 11 as the percentage. You would then look up the present value factor on that table. Let me just do this for one of them so that we can do this together. Just find the present value of an annuity. I want 11%. Oh, gosh, this is so tiny. And I want 7 years. 4.712 is the annualized net present value. And what we do is we take this net present value to 532,986 and we divide it by that factor 4.712, and you will get sorry, I'm looking at the wrong amount here. I want the net present value. This must be the net present value here, the 11,935,927. We take the net present value and divide it by the present value of an annuity factor, and the answer that you get won't be identical to the one from the financial calculator, but it will be close enough. And we allow for these rounding differences. So if I do this on my calculator, 11,935,927 divided by 4.712, I get 2.533 091. And you can see it's slightly different to the one that we got here using the financial calculator. Slightly different, but we expect that in these types of calculations with the number of decimals that we are using. Okay, so those are your two different methods you can use to calculate ANPV. Either the financial calculator method or the financial tables method. So this question here was for 27 marks, which is a wonderful question to get because if you know your method and what to do to calculate an ANPV, then that's an easy 27 marks. And you can definitely do that in much less than 27 minutes, which means you'll be able to gain time for some other question that you might need a little bit longer to spend on it. Okay, so you can see that what you need to memorize is the method. When they ask me for annualized net present value, you have to know step 1, calculate the net present value for the project that they've asked me for. And then step number 2, look up the present value of an annuity factor for that project, and then divide the net present value by that present value of an annuity factor. That's the quickest and easiest method to remember. So honestly, guys, do that method. If you want to use the financial calculator method and you prefer to memorize that, that's absolutely fine. So instead of using the 7 years and 11% to look up the present value of annuity factor, 4.712, you are just writing those down. Also writing down the net present value and then calculating comp PMT. Okay. So this particular question, 45 marks, is a really nice question, and none of that is horribly difficult. Would be horribly difficult if you haven't practiced and you don't know what your methods are. Gosh, it's already 10 to 7. The time goes by so quickly. Let me just see what else we've got here. 25 marks. This is a sale of a bonds question. I just want to see if there's something we'll have time to finish quickly. All right, let's just have a look at the rest of the questions so that you can see in this question paper what it was that they asked the students. So question 3 for 25 marks. This is a bond valuation question. So that would be learning unit 4, bonds. And they said, calculate the profit or loss that Mr. McEnroe would make if he sold the bonds after he had initially purchased them. So he's going to purchase the bonds today, and then he is later on going to sell them. We then have to calculate, would he make a profit or a loss when he sold the bonds in the future? Okay. So they're saying here he sold them after holding the bonds for 80% of their duration. So of the bond's lifetime, he kept them for 80% of the life of the bond and then sold them. So there would be 2 calculations in this particular question. Number 1, you would have to calculate what price would Mr. McEnroe pay for the bonds today if he purchased them. So that is the basic bond valuation formula. B0, solve for B0, what is the value of the bond today, which would be the price that he paid for it. And then you would value the bonds again, same calculation, value them again, but with the information adjusted that the remaining life of the bond is now only 20% of its initial 10 years. And also that the required rate of return had changed. That's a really nice question. I like this question for a bond question. So again, I won't go through these in total. 2 calculations. Calculate the value of the calculation of the bond price today. So the BO, the B0, bond valuation today. Par value of the bond is the future value. The bond is got 10 years to maturity, and the coupon pays every 4 years, so 10 times 4 for N. The PMT, the coupon percentage, is 18%. So the coupon the par value of the bond multiplied by the coupon rate of 18%. We divide that by 4 because each one of the 4 payments during the year will only be for 1/4 of the PMT. And then the interest rate or the required rate of return is then going to be, they said it was 2/3 of the coupon rate. So 18% times 2/3, and that divided by 4. So remember, when we've got multiple compounding periods in a year, we then use N times M for the number of periods, and we use R divided by M for our percentage or required rate of return that we calculate. And then again, the price of the bonds when the bonds are sold. Present value when we bought them and the present value when we sold them. And then we could see that we sold them for less than we paid for them. So we would then make a loss on sale of the bonds. And here you just had to work out how many bonds. So we would have 45 bonds. So the difference in price for one bond multiplied by 45 bonds, and that would then give us our total loss on the sale of the bonds at the end of the 8 years that we had kept them for. So that's a really good question. Okay, guys, I'm going to finish up for this evening here because it's just about 7 o'clock, and I know some students have got classes again, have got the next class as well. Let me just go back there. So we will carry on with this question paper next week and do some more of the questions. And then don't forget also that this particular question paper, it is already calculated, or not should I say calculated, it is already fully recorded in the YouTube channel. So you'll be able to go there and brush up on anything that we don't manage to finish in these sessions. Okay, so hopefully this is already starting to refresh your memories on everything that we've done, all the different chapters, learning units, and then we'll have a look at the rest of the learning units next week. Anybody got any questions before we finish off? Anything that you want to know? Okay, it really does, Chris. It really does help just to refresh, and it also helps you to know, to remind yourself how much you do already know. You just need to jog your memory, and you go, oh yeah, I do remember that, I do know that, and just keep refreshing your memory. That's great. And Mark, are you okay at this stage? Perfect. Okay. All right, guys, so don't forget, I'm available for any questions that you've got while you get on with your revision. Just send me an email or a message via Learn, and then I'll be able to help you. Okay, guys, let me finish up the recording.